My name is Madison Riley. I'm 34 years old, a sustainable architect living in Austin, Texas. And last month I received the same text I've gotten for the last 3 years. Hey, Maddie, just wanted to give you a heads up. The ranch is at full capacity this year for the family retreat. Hope you understand. Love you. That was it. No phone call, no explanation, just a recycled excuse dressed in faux warmth and a dismissive love you that felt more like punctuation than affection. For context, the ranch in question isn't just some little Airbnb in the countryside. It's our family's generational land in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. 500 acres of golden pastures, winding pine trails, and the original Riley homestead built in 1894. Every summer since I was born, my parents hosted a retreat there for our extended family. The week was sacred. Think bonfires, horseback rides, hiking trails, morning biscuits made from my grandmother's secret recipe. It was a core part of our family identity, something we passed down, something we protected, or so I thought. I used to go every year, even after I moved to Austin for college, even when I was juggling internships and studio critiques and 16-hour days on building sites. I made it a priority because being there made me feel like I still belonged somewhere. But 3 summers ago, I got that first text. The one that said keeping it small this year, just immediate family. I didn't cry. Not at first. I told myself maybe they were really scaling things back. Maybe the guest cabins were under renovation. Maybe it was a weird year. I convinced myself not to take it personally until I saw the photos. There they were on Instagram and Facebook, my siblings and their spouses, all 5 of them with their kids, their dogs, even a couple of family friends from church. Dozens of people smiling on horseback, the fire pit glowing with laughter and guitars. My dad giving the annual toast in his usual Mr. Riley fashion, standing on the deck with a bourbon in hand. The same traditions, the same place, the same family, minus me. That year, there were 64 people at the retreat. The next year, 91. And this year, 117. I know the exact number because my oldest sister, Rachel, always the type A planner, posted a beautifully designed itinerary online. I zoomed in on her Instagram story and counted. They even booked 2 extra cabins for overflow guests. So tell me, what exactly does no room really mean? When I saw the number, I laughed. Not a real laugh. One of those low, breathless, bitter exhales that lives somewhere between a sob and a scream. I was standing in my studio surrounded by concept boards and floor plans and models of sustainable learning centers I'd been designing for a nonprofit. I'd just wrapped a project for a children's museum that won an award. My inbox was full of new client inquiries. I'd built a business, a real one, a meaningful one. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Because to them, to my parents, I was still the one who left. Not the cowboy boot-wearing vet like Caleb. Not the rodeo queen turned ranch manager like Emma. Not the accountant who now manages the Riley Land Trust like Trevor. I was the one who traded pasture land for paper blueprints, who swapped branding cattle for city zoning codes, who loved wildflowers more than hay bales and believed in recycled wood more than tradition. To them, I didn't fit. And slowly, then suddenly, they stopped pretending I did. So this year, something cracked open inside me. Maybe it was rage, maybe grief, maybe it was the exhaustion of being gracious in the face of casual cruelty. But I made a decision. If my family couldn't make space for me, then maybe it was time I stopped waiting for a seat at their table. Maybe it was time to build my own table. Before I take you down that road, before I tell you what happened next and how it changed everything, I just want to say this. If you've ever felt like the family outcast, if you've ever watched the people who were supposed to love you the most lock the door while smiling at the camera, if you've ever swallowed your hurt to keep the peace, told yourself it didn't matter, convinced yourself to be understanding, while they made no effort to understand you, you're not alone. This story is for you, and trust me, you're going to want to see how it ends. Long before the texts stopped coming, before I was quietly cut from the photos and the guest list, the ranch was everything to me. I was 8 years old the first time my grandfather, Henry Riley, Pop Henry we called him, let me ride one of the horses by myself. It was early June, the air crisp with lingering snowmelt, and the mountains in the distance still wore white crowns. He lifted me onto a chestnut mare named Willa and said, She's a little stubborn, like someone else I know. I remember gripping the reins with my tiny hands, legs too short for the stirrups, heart pounding, with the kind of thrill you only feel once in a childhood. Pop Henry didn't walk beside me or hold the reins. He trusted me, and that trust changed something in me forever. That's the version of the ranch I still carry in my mind. The real one, the one before things got formal. It used to be messy in the best way. We'd pile into the old barn for pancakes made on a cast iron skillet the size of a wagon wheel, kids chasing chickens while someone strummed a guitar on the porch, my mom yelling for someone to close the dang screen door before the bugs eat us alive. It was laughter and sunburn and eating corn on the cob with butter running down our wrists. Nobody wore makeup, nobody cared about LinkedIn profiles, and nobody had to earn their place. Pop Henry loved everyone equally, but he saw me in a way no one else did. When the other kids were racing ATVs or helping with hay bales, I'd be sitting on the porch sketching the silhouette of the Tetons against the sky. Most adults barely noticed, but Pop Henry, he'd pull up a folding chair beside me and say, "Show me what you see, darlin'." He was the first person who said my drawings weren't just cute. He said they had perspective, that I saw space like an architect, even before I knew the word. "You're building worlds on paper," he'd whisper, watching my pencil move. "One day you'll build them for real." It became our thing, me sketching him, sipping his sweet tea, sharing silence like it was sacred. My siblings teased me for being the quiet one, the indoor kid, but Pop Henry called me the observer. He made it sound like a superpower. When I was 15, I told him I wanted to go to design school. His eyes twinkled behind thick lenses and he said, "The ranch will always be here, sweetheart. Go build something of your own." But not everyone felt that way. My father, Grant Riley, fourth-generation rancher and reigning patriarch, didn't believe in cities or screens or art that didn't involve leather tooling. When I told him I'd applied to the University of Oregon's Sustainable Architecture program, he didn't even look up from the financial ledger he was reviewing. "You'll grow out of it," he said flatly, "just like you grew out of wanting to be a marine biologist." I didn't grow out of that, I told him. I realized I didn't want to dissect fish for a living. He grunted. "Design's just fantasy with a fancy name. Ranching is real work." I could have argued. I could have rattled off stats about climate-resilient housing or told him how design could improve lives in underserved communities. But I didn't, because I knew it wouldn't matter. My mom, Denise, tried to play peacemaker. She offered her signature half smile and said, "Well, maybe it's just a phase. You know how artistic types are." Then she changed the subject to wedding plans for my sister Emma. It didn't matter how many scholarships I earned, how many late nights I pulled in the studio, or that I graduated magna cum laude. It didn't matter that I started my own firm at 27 or that one of my early designs was featured in Architectural Digest. At home at the ranch, I was still the flight risk, the drifter, the daughter who chose plywood over plowshares. Pop Henry never lived to see my first office or the awards that came after. He passed away my sophomore year of college, stroke in his sleep, gone just like that. I flew home immediately, caught the last flight into Jackson, arrived straight from a model review in a paint-streaked t-shirt and 3 days' worth of caffeine on my breath. At the funeral, I sat apart from my siblings. Not by intention, but because that's where space was left. I wore black. They wore boots polished like glass. I gave the eulogy, though, not because anyone asked me to, but because no one else wanted to speak. I told the story of the first time he handed me a pencil and told me I was allowed to see things differently. A week later, the will was read. The ranch went to my parents as expected. But Pop Henry had also written a letter, his last request. In it, he asked that the annual retreat continue and that each of his grandchildren always feel welcome. At the time, I believed they'd honor it, but I was wrong. After he was gone, the retreat began to change. Slowly, at first, less spontaneity, more scheduling, fewer hay rides, more photo ops. The guest list grew from just family to include business partners, church friends, even local politicians. My father started referring to it as a networking opportunity, a phrase that made my skin crawl. It stopped being about togetherness. It became about optics. And little by little, I began to fade from the center. At first, I still showed up. I'd fly in for 3 days instead of 7. I'd sleep in the hayloft when the guest rooms were taken. I didn't mind. I just wanted to be there. I wanted to feel like I still belonged. But then came the first year I wasn't invited, then the second, then the third, and this year, when they invited 117 people and told me there wasn't space. That was the moment I knew they weren't overlooking me, they were deliberately looking away. The first year I was officially uninvited, I told myself it was a fluke. It was 2021. We were still mid-pandemic, and the text arrived in late May. Hey, Maddie, just a heads up, this year's retreat is going to be really small due to health precautions. Just immediate family, maybe next year, immediate family. I remember staring at those two words like they were written in stone. I almost laughed because I was, in fact, immediate family. I was one of 6 children, a Riley by blood, a granddaughter of Pop Henry, same as the rest, but still, I nodded. I smiled, I texted back something like, totally understand, stay safe, and enjoy. And then I opened Instagram. Photos started popping up 2 days into the retreat, my sister Rachel, in a wide-brimmed hat on a trail ride with her kids, my brother Trevor playing horseshoes near the fire pit, Mom in a new sundress giving a toast next to the American flag, and Caleb, my oldest brother, filming a slow-motion video of his daughter running through the pasture. I counted nearly 40 people in the backgrounds of those shots. 40. I cried that night. I won't pretend I didn't. It was the kind of cry that comes silently while you sit in the dark and try not to make noise. The kind that leaves you with a headache and swollen eyes, and the shameful knowledge that you're mourning something that no one else considers lost. I told myself I wouldn't let it bother me next time. But the second year, the text came earlier. Hey, honey, we're keeping it small again this summer. We're just doing immediate siblings and their families this time around. Hope you're doing something fun that week. I had just finished designing a low-income housing complex in East Austin using fully recycled steel and solar integrated walls. The local news had covered it. The mayor had shown up at the ribbon cutting. But to my parents, I was still the one who didn't fit into the family photo. That year, the retreat had over 90 guests. I know this because my cousin Libby tagged me in a comment on Facebook, "Wish you were here." Feels like the whole town showed up, I replied with a heart emoji and muted the thread. I started noticing other patterns too, subtle but unmistakable. At Christmas, I got a generic Amazon gift card while my siblings received tailored gifts framed, family portraits, monogram jackets, engraved watches. At Thanksgiving, my mother posted a collage of family moments with the caption, "Grateful for our tribe." I wasn't in a single photo. At my niece's birthday party, someone asked my mom if all her kids were there and she answered yes, even though I was standing 10 feet away setting up paper lanterns. Sometimes it's not the grand slams that bruise you, it's the paper cuts, tiny accumulating dismissals that tell you over and over you don't really belong here. I tried to make peace with it. I focused on work. My design studio was thriving. I'd expanded to a team of 6 working on everything, from eco-conscious school renovations to community gardens in low-income neighborhoods. Clients respected me. My team admired me. I was good at what I did. But inside there was still this aching, unanswered question. What did I do to become the daughter who doesn't get invited? Was it because I didn't marry young like Rachel? Because I didn't have kids like Emma and Trevor? Because I didn't choose a real job like Caleb, who managed ranch inventory and investments? Because I never joined the family trust, Zoom meetings where they discussed new cattle partners and land rights? Was it because I refused to be someone I wasn't? There were moments I almost confronted them. I drafted long texts that I never sent, practiced conversations in the mirror, but something always held me back. Part pride, part fear. I didn't want to beg for inclusion. I didn't want to demand space in a room that kept moving the chairs without me. And if I was honest with myself, I didn't believe it would change anything. Then came this year. It was a Thursday night in early June. I had just finished a design review for a new public library being built in Denver and was scrolling through my phone mindlessly when I saw it. A blurry screenshot from my brother Trevor's Instagram story, a color-coded itinerary, bold font at the top, 2024 Riley Family Ranch Retreat. Schedule of events, 117. Confirmed guests. I blinked, zoomed in, scanned the list. Saturday trail ride by reservation only. Sunday group brunch at the Deck Pavilion. Monday bonfire storytelling night with special guests. Special guests I recognized names, siblings, cousins, in laws, even family friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Some of the guests weren't even Riley's. They were neighbors, my dad's college roommate, my mother's book club friends. There was even a name I didn't expect, Carter Blake, my ex boyfriend from architecture school, who now worked in Montana and occasionally did consulting for dad's land deals. But me, nowhere. I texted Trevor retreat looks packed this year. Big group. He replied instantly, yeah, wild turnout. Dad's been stressing about logistics for weeks. Had to rent out the cabin next door and the old Miller place too. 2 extra properties, 117 people. I didn't respond. I just set the phone down. Walked to my kitchen, poured a glass of wine, and sat on the floor of my apartment with my back against the fridge. The city lights of Austin flickered outside my window, and for the first time in years, I didn't cry. I just went numb. Because it hit me finally and fully, it was never about space. It was about me, about who I was, and more importantly, who I wasn't. I wasn't the child they wanted at the table. I wasn't the daughter who made them proud. I wasn't the right kind of Riley. I wasn't chosen, and I was done pretending it didn't hurt. That night, I called Leo, my best friend, my college roommate, and now my studio's creative director. He picked up on the second ring. Hey, Mads. What's up? They did it again? I said, my voice breaking slightly. They're hosting 117 people, and I'm still not invited. There was a long pause. Then Jesus. I think I've officially run out of excuses to make for them. You think, he said gently. Mads, I love you, but your tolerance level is Olympic. I gave a hollow laugh. I'm tired of asking for a seat. Then maybe, he said, you should stop asking. There was silence. I felt the words settle into my chest like weight. What do you mean, I asked, even though I already knew. You're an architect, Madison Leo said. You don't wait for space. You create it. And just like that, something shifted. A seed planted, a blueprint forming. If they wouldn't make room for me, maybe it was time I built something no one could ignore. After that call with Leo, I didn't sleep. My brain was a mess of adrenaline pain and plans forming faster than I could catch them. Somewhere between 3:00 and 4:00 a.m., I opened a blank sketch pad, the same one I used to design project concepts. But this time, I wasn't drafting for a client. I was sketching for myself. I drew a house nestled in the trees, a wide deck with panoramic views, a long communal table, workshop spaces, fire pits, hammocks, morning light through floor-to-ceiling windows, rooms filled with people who saw each other, who made space for one another. By sunrise, the sketch was detailed and clear. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want confrontation. What I wanted, what I needed, was to reclaim what had been taken from me, belonging. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and searched for properties in the Rockies. Not Wyoming. I couldn't bear to be that close to the ranch, but somewhere nearby. Familiar yet entirely mine. Telluride, Colorado kept popping up. Scenic, peaceful, artist-friendly, high elevation but low ego. Within 30 minutes, I found it. An 8-acre private estate just outside town, 6 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen, a deck that seemed to float above the trees. There was even a path down to a private creek and a studio space with exposed beams and massive windows. It was available for rent. For the exact same week as the family retreat. I stared at the photos like I was looking at a dream I didn't realize I had. It was expensive, more than I'd ever spent on anything that wasn't real estate or payroll. The rental fee alone was nearly $9,000 for the week, plus a hefty security deposit. But I had savings. I'd been planning to use it for a down payment on a small home. Maybe I could still do that one day, but right now, this felt more important. I hit inquire to book and filled in my contact information with trembling fingers. That night, I told Leo everything over margaritas and chips on our apartment balcony. You're serious, he asked, raising an eyebrow as I showed him the property listing on my phone. Dead serious. I'm calling it reclaimed space. He grinned. God, that's perfect. I want it to be part retreat, part gathering, part creative recharge, not just for me, for people like us, people who've had to explain themselves too many times. Leo leaned back in his chair and looked out at the skyline. You know I'm in, right? I was counting on it. He raised his glass to taking up space. I clinked mine against his to building it ourselves. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning and logistics. But it was a different kind of work. Lighter, intentional, healing. I booked the estate and put down the full deposit. I created a Google Doc and brainstormed activities, morning movement sessions, creative journaling group hikes, campfires, storytelling, design thinking workshops, silent mornings, open mic evenings. I reached out to Miranda, a ceramicist I'd met at a design symposium in San Diego. She agreed to lead a clay workshop on the patio. Troy, a nature photographer and longtime friend, offered to guide sunrise photo walks. Leo would host a workshop on storytelling and branding for creatives. Every person I invited was chosen with care, not because of status or bloodline, but because they had given me grace at some point in my life. I built a simple website for reclaimed space using muted earth tones, line work inspired by my original sketches, and a gentle call to action. You don't need permission to take up space. You just need a place where you're welcomed for who you are. I designed digital invitations and sent them out to 25 people. I expected maybe 10 confirmations max. Within 48 hours, I had 19. Each response made me cry a little. This is exactly what I didn't know I needed. I've never been invited to something like this before. Count me in. You always know how to make people feel at home. Of course I'm coming. Some of the most touching replies came from people who had never met each other, but had all intersected in my world: former clients, old roommates, a college professor, a freelance illustrator from New York who I'd collaborated with on a children's book campaign years ago. I debated inviting anyone from my family. For a while, the idea made me feel nauseous. But eventually, I added two names: Heather, my youngest sister, and Caleb, my oldest brother. Heather had always walked a quieter path. A school counselor in Portland, she was the only one who had ever asked me about my business unprompted. She'd even shared one of my design posts on Facebook once. Caleb was more complicated. He'd never stuck up for me, but he'd never outright dismissed me either. We'd shared quiet moments growing up. He was the one who taught me to climb the barn roof and look at stars. I wanted to leave the door open. I didn't include my parents. I wasn't ready for that. Planning the retreat became a full-time second job. Every detail mattered. I worked with a local florist to create foraged wildflower arrangements. I designed personalized journals for each guest, each one embossed with the Reclaim Space logo, a geometric rendering of overlapping circles inside a square symbolizing inclusion within boundaries. I ordered custom enamel mugs, sourced organic linens, and spent evenings building Spotify playlists with mellow acoustic music forest sounds and a few of Pop Henry's favorite bluegrass tracks. I even planned the menu: simple, nourishing meals made with local ingredients. I couldn't afford a private chef, but Leo knew someone, Sasha, who had done catering for art residencies in the past. She agreed to cook for the week in exchange for lodging and a travel stipend. Every night after work, I stayed up till midnight working on retreat logistics. But it wasn't draining. It was the opposite. For once, I wasn't designing for a client or a committee. I was designing for a feeling, a space where no one had to prove they belonged. 1 week before the retreat, as I was finishing the welcome kits, each one with soaps from a local maker, a Polaroid camera, trail maps, and handwritten notes, I received a text from Heather. Just booked my flight to Telluride. I'm really proud of you, Mads. I stared at the message for a long time, then replied, thank you for showing up. It means more than you know. Later that night, I posted the first teaser for Reclaim Space on my design studio's Instagram, a photo of the estate deck at sunset, golden light stretching across the trees. The caption read, sometimes you don't need a bigger table. You just need to build your own house. By morning, I had 600 likes. And a DM from Caleb: that house looks incredible. What are you building up there? I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I didn't answer. Not yet. I was still building. I arrived in Telluride the day before the retreat began. My car packed to the brim with boxes of supplies, bundles of wildflowers, and enough nervous energy to power the entire town. As I pulled up the winding drive toward the estate, the house came into view, a modern mountain structure with cedar siding, black-framed windows, and clean geometric lines that somehow blended perfectly into the alpine landscape. It was exactly how I'd imagined it when I first sketched it in the early morning haze weeks ago. But this wasn't a drawing. This was real. I had done this. The property manager, a kind woman named Elise, greeted me with a clipboard and a thorough tour. "The kitchen's stocked with your grocery delivery," she said, "and the creek path's been cleared since the last storm." I nodded, half listening, half in awe as we walked through the sun-drenched great room. The ceiling soared 2 stories high, the windows perfectly framing the pine-covered slope beyond. Every corner of the house whispered intention, and now it was mine to fill with laughter, with light, with people who had chosen to be here. When she left, I stood in silence for a long time, just breathing, just existing, just feeling the difference between asking for space and owning it. I got to work immediately. In each bedroom, I placed a welcome basket on the freshly made beds. Inside a journal, a hand-drawn map of the property herbal tea, a disposable film camera, and a note with the guest's name. Written in gold ink, "You belong here. Thank you for bringing your presence, your energy, and your creative fire." By sunset, I had finished lighting the citronella candles on the deck and placing small vases of wildflowers around the house. I poured a glass of wine, sat on one of the rocking chairs facing west, and watched the sky erupt into pinks and oranges as the sun dipped behind the mountains. It was the first time I'd felt peace in weeks. The next morning, the first car pulled up just before 11 a.m. Leo was, of course, the first to arrive, his rental car filled with art supplies, an extra speaker system, and 3 kinds of organic snacks he insisted everyone needed. "You actually did it," he said as he stepped out and spun slowly in a circle, taking in the scenery. "Madison Riley, you built a fucking sanctuary." I hugged him tightly. "We built it." Throughout the afternoon, guests trickled in one by one. Miranda with her clay tools wrapped in canvas rolls, Troy and his husband David with camera gear and hiking boots, Sasha the chef with 2 enormous coolers, and old friends from college whose hugs felt like time travel. Everyone had the same reaction when they entered: awe followed by warmth. The energy shifted with each arrival, like the space itself was stretching and smiling. By late afternoon, we were 22 in total. And then Heather arrived. I was on the deck when I saw her car pull in. My chest tightened. She stepped out wearing a denim jacket, backpack slung over one shoulder, and sunglasses pushed into her wavy brown hair. I walked toward her slowly, unsure of what to expect. She opened her arms without hesitation. "I made it," she whispered, hugging me hard. "This place it's magic." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. "You're the magic," I said, pulling back just enough to look at her. "You chose to be here." She nodded. It was never even a question. That evening, our first dinner took place on the deck, under a canopy of string lights that Leo and I had hung earlier. Sasha served roasted trout with citrus-glazed heirloom vegetables and fresh sourdough that made the entire house smell like comfort. The table stretched down the length of the deck candles, flickering wine-flowing conversation buzzing like bees in spring. I stood to welcome everyone, my hands shaking just slightly. "I don't usually speak in front of groups," I began, "but I want to thank you all for coming, not just to a retreat, but into a space I created from something very personal. This started as a reaction to being excluded, yes, but now, standing here, it feels like something much more powerful. This is reclamation. This is choosing each other. This is proof that we don't have to wait for permission to gather, to connect, to belong." Everyone raised their glasses. "To creating our own space," Leo added. "To finding each other," said Miranda. We clinked glasses under the stars, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was watching the celebration from the edge. I was at the center of it. The next morning began with sunrise yoga led by David, who guided us through gentle movements on the deck as the valley below filled with golden light. We sipped coffee afterward, wrapped in blankets, watching a herd of elk move through the distant tree line. The day unfolded effortlessly. Troy led a small group on a nature photography hike, pointing out light angles and animal tracks. Miranda set up her pottery wheels on the patio and showed others how to shape bowls from slabs of clay. I floated between groups, sometimes joining, sometimes observing. It was everything the ranch used to be before the suits and the politics and the curated guest lists. It was play. It was wonder. It was presence. During the journaling circle that afternoon, we sat cross-legged on the rug in the great room, sunlight striping across the floor, each person holding their custom notebooks. Leo passed out prompts. "What are you reclaiming in this season of your life?" One by one, people began to share. I'm reclaiming my voice, said one. I'm reclaiming stillness, said another. When it was my turn, I hesitated, then spoke quietly. I'm reclaiming worth that doesn't require proof. I'm reclaiming the right to exist fully, even if I don't fit someone else's mold. I'm reclaiming the table. There was a pause, and then a round of quiet nods. That night, as we gathered around the fire pit, roasting marshmallows and listening to live acoustic guitar, I felt it again, that deep, aching joy of being exactly where you're meant to be. Heather sat beside me, toasting a marshmallow with one hand, sipping tea with the other. I've been meaning to say something, she said. About the retreat? About the ranch? I looked at her. I didn't realize how much they were excluding you, she said. I think I convinced myself you were just too busy, or didn't care anymore. I shook my head. I cared. I just got tired of begging to be seen. She placed a hand on mine. Will I see you? This whole week. It's the first time in a long time I felt like I could exhale, like I wasn't trying to perform. Her voice broke slightly. I think you created more than a retreat, Mads. I think you created home. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just a counter event. It wasn't a statement. It was a beginning. The next chapter in my story, not the one they wrote for me, but the one I built brick by brick, word by word, guest by guest. The last guest pulled out of the driveway just after noon on Sunday. I stood barefoot on the gravel, still in my flannel pajama pants, waving as Miranda and Troy loaded the final box of pottery pieces into the back of their Subaru. Leo was already inside, finishing up the guest survey emails because he refused to let all that feedback go undocumented. Heather lingered until the end, hugging me tightly by the garden gate. You're going to do this again, right? She asked. I nodded. Absolutely. She smiled. Let me know as soon as you set the dates. I'm blocking it off now. Then with tears in both our eyes, she whispered, You helped me remember who I was before I started performing for approval. Thank you for that. When she drove away, I turned back toward the house now quiet, lived in, and full of energy that still hummed in the walls. I took a deep breath. It was over, but it wasn't. The drive back to Austin felt different this time. There was no heaviness, no wondering if I should have done more or said less. There was just a quiet pride humming beneath my ribs. Not the loud kind that seeks recognition, but the steady kind that comes from knowing you honored something real inside yourself. When I stepped into my apartment that evening, it felt transformed. Same furniture, same walls, same creaky floorboard in the hallway. But the energy had shifted. This was no longer the space where I mourned being left out. It was now the space of the woman who had built her own table and filled it. I unpacked slowly over the next few days. Each object I pulled from the bags brought me back to a moment, the scent of pine from the homemade soaps, the sound of laughter around the fire, the soft grit of clay still clinging to the pottery aprons. On the third night back, I lit a candle and opened the email inbox dedicated to reclaimed space. It was overflowing. Dozens of messages from attendees. I didn't realize how hungry I was for real connection until last week. Thank you for showing me a different way to create and live. This was one of the most transformative experiences of my life. Please tell me you're doing it again. Some had already posted about the retreat on social media. Miranda had uploaded photos of the pottery sessions captioned Clay Conversation and Courage. Troy's landscape shots of Telluride had gone viral on Twitter, and he'd tagged Reclaimed Space in every post. One email was from a guest I didn't even know had attended a +1 of another attendee. It simply read, I arrived as a stranger and left feeling seen. I didn't think that was possible anymore. Thank you. I cried reading that one. Not because I was sad, but because it was working. This space, this thing I had built out of rejection, it was working. Professionally, the ripple effect was immediate. A week later, my design studio was featured in a write-up by a sustainable living magazine. They had seen the retreat through Miranda's post and wanted to do a profile on me, not just my projects, but on how physical spaces can be used for emotional healing. The article went live under the title, The Architect Who Built Belonging. It exploded. I was invited to speak at 2 design summits, one in New York, another in Vancouver, on the intersection of architecture and mental health. A publisher even reached out asking if I had interest in writing a book about spatial storytelling. It was wild. But what mattered more than any of that was the quiet shift happening within my own family. A few days after I returned, I met Heather for lunch in Austin. She had rerouted a work trip just to spend time with me. We talked for 3 hours. She shared how hard it had been growing up under the same roof, feeling constantly measured against Rachel, and Emma constantly overlooked unless she performed according to expectations. Your retreat was the first time I realized how much I'd internalized all of that, she said. Later that week, I received a message from Caleb. I owe you a real conversation. When are you free? We talked by phone for nearly an hour. He told me he was proud of what I'd built. He admitted he hadn't known the extent of how I'd been treated. I guess I just didn't want to rock the boat, he said, but that wasn't fair to you. I told him I appreciated the honesty, that we were all just trying to unlearn old systems. I'd like to come to the next one, he said before we hung up. That meant more than he knew. And then came the dinner with my parents. They invited me to their house in San Antonio. I almost said no, but Heather encouraged me to go, not to please them, but to test the new ground I was standing on. We ate outside under the pergola cicadas buzzing in the distance. There was awkwardness, of course. There always would be. But there was also effort. My father asked about the retreat, not about the logistics, but about the people. My mother showed me a photo of a ceramic bowl she bought at a local gallery. It reminded me of what your friend was making, she said a little self-consciously. It wasn't an apology, but it was a step. They told me they were planning to downsize the next family retreat. It's gotten a bit out of hand, my father said. We've lost the spirit of it, I think. They wanted it to be more like what Pop Henry envisioned again, more like the early days. My mom added, we'd love for you to help design it next year. Or if you prefer to keep doing your own thing, that's okay too. I didn't commit to anything that night, but I thanked them, genuinely. And as I drove home that evening, windows down, warm air rushing through, I realized something I hadn't. Before, I wasn't trying to get back in anymore. I wasn't knocking on locked doors. I had built my own house, and if they wanted to knock, they were welcome. But I wouldn't shrink myself again just to be let in. 3 months after the retreat, I received a letter. A real letter. Handwritten, on thick cream paper. It was from my great-aunt Margaret Pop Henry's youngest sister, now 87 years old and still sharp as a whip. She had seen the article about my retreat. She'd read everything she could find online. Her words stayed with me. Your grandfather always said you were the one who saw things others missed. You saw people, you saw space, you saw possibilities. He would be proud, not just of what you've done, but of who you've become. I kept that letter on my desk for weeks. It reminded me that legacy isn't inherited. It's built brick by brick, choice by choice, truth by truth. I'm planning the next retreat now. Reclaim Space 2.0. We're adding a few new things this year, a night hike, an open-air gallery, and a permission slip ritual on the first night where each guest writes down something they're letting go of and burns it in the fire. And we're doubling capacity, but not the spirit. That remains the same. We are not recreating the ranch. We're reclaiming something deeper, a space for those who've been forgotten, overlooked, told they were too much or not enough, a space to remember ourselves, to rebuild, to belong. It's been almost a year since I hosted that first retreat. Sometimes I forget just how much has changed until I pause and really let myself feel it. Not just the professional impact, though, that's been remarkable. Not the fact that my design studio now has a 6-month waiting list, or that I've been invited to speak at 3 international architecture summits. Not even the book proposal that came from a literary agent who attended Reclaim Space as a guest of a guest. No, what matters more than any of that is this. I'm no longer looking for permission to exist. I'm no longer hoping someone will make room for me at their table. I have my own table now, and it's big and warm and built with intention. And anyone who shows up in good faith is welcome to sit down. The second retreat happened last month, once again in the mountains of Colorado, but this time not at the rented estate in Telluride. This time it happened on the land I inherited. Let me explain. Shortly after Reclaim Space went viral online, I received a phone call from the family trust lawyer. At first, I assumed it was about taxes or some document I had missed, but what he told me made me sit down. Margaret Riley, your great aunt, has requested that 1 week each summer be designated for your use of the Jackson Hole Ranch as outlined in her amendment to the original family agreement. I was stunned. Wait, I said. She wants me to host something there, she insisted. She said your grandfather would have wanted the land used for community and creativity, not just cattle and catered events. And just like that, I found myself standing at the gates of the very ranch that once told me I didn't belong. But this time, I had the keys. Returning to that land for the first time in 5 years was surreal. Everything was both exactly the same and completely different. The pine still stood tall, the river still ran wild, and the porch swing still creaked in the same lazy rhythm it always had. But I was not the same. I brought my team. I brought Leo and Heather. I brought Miranda and Troy and Sasha and 20 new creatives from all walks of life, filmmakers, teachers, healers, writers, social workers, and one retired nurse who started painting at 62. We cleaned the barn, strung up lights, repaired old picnic tables. We turned the hayloft into a meditation space and converted the storage shed into a clay studio. We built fire pits from reclaimed stone. We rewrote the energy of that land without erasing what it once was. My parents came, not to host, not to supervise. They came as guests. They stayed 2 days. My father helped Sasha prep vegetables. My mother watched one of the workshops from the porch and later asked if I could teach her how to journal. There was no grand speech, no dramatic apology, but there was presence, and that was enough. On the final evening of the retreat, we held our closing circle under the stars in the pasture behind the main house. Everyone sat on wool blankets in a wide ring fire crackling in the center. It was my turn to speak, and I held the same river stone we'd passed at every retreat. I've been thinking a lot lately, I said, about what it means to belong. I used to think it meant being accepted, being invited, being included. But I've learned something else this past year. Sometimes belonging isn't about being let in, it's about not shrinking to fit the wrong space. I paused. Belonging isn't something they give you, it's something you claim. Heads nodded all around me. A few people wiped their eyes. I'm proud of the work we've done here, I said, voice catching. But more than that, I'm proud of what we've reclaimed, not just this space, but ourselves. There was silence, then applause. And then someone started singing softly an old folk song Pop Henry used to hum while mending fence posts. And before I knew it, the entire circle joined in. A harmony of strangers who had become something more. Not family by blood, but by choice. In the months since, I've been reflecting a lot on legacy. Not the kind written in legal documents or attached to last names, but the kind you carry in the way you live. My grandfather built fences and fed horses. I build structures and tell stories through space. We're not so different. He saw people, he made room, he made me feel seen. And now I get to do that for others. That's the legacy I care about. Some relationships in my family are still rocky. Amanda, my second oldest sister, never responded to her invite for Reclaim Space 2.0. Brian sent a text saying he wasn't sure about all that creative energy stuff. Lily came for the first hour, then left early without a word. But that's okay, because healing doesn't require everyone to show up. It just requires you to stop abandoning yourself, and that's something I'll never do again. As I write this, I'm sitting on the porch of my new home. Not a condo in Austin, not a retreat estate, my own home. It's a little modern farmhouse on the outskirts of Boulder, Colorado, with solar panels on the roof and a garden out back that I planted with my own hands. It's the house my retreat helped build financially, emotionally, spiritually. On the wall of my office, I've hung a framed photo from Reclaim Space. Not the one with all the guests smiling. Not even one with my family. It's a shot Leo took of me alone, barefoot on the deck, arms wide open as the wind moved through the pines behind me. The caption he wrote underneath reads, "She stopped waiting to be seen, so she made something no one could ignore." If you're still reading, maybe part of this story is yours too. Maybe you felt that kind of exclusion, the subtle, suffocating kind that pretends it's accidental, but is rooted in something much deeper. Maybe you've waited to be invited into a space that never had you in mind. If so, I want to say this to you clearly and without hesitation. You don't need permission. You don't need proof. You don't need to get smaller to fit where you were never meant to be. Build your own table. Build it long. Build it wide. Build it with extra chairs for the ones still finding their way. And when the people who once overlooked you come knocking, let them see what you've built. Not to prove your worth, but to remind yourself you were never lacking in the first place. You just needed room. Thank you for being here. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who's still sitting outside the house, wondering if they'll ever be invited in. Remind them they can build their own door, and behind it, a space that finally fully feels like home.